This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatters.com. And we are also a YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and just type in Spirit Matters, ends with an S, it's plural, talk, Spirit Matters Talk. We have about 300 shows in our archives. We've been on the YouTube channel. We have about 25 episodes there. And we want to thank those people that have contributed to help keep us on the air, and go to spiritmatterstalk.com and find out if you would like to be one of those people. And we are very happy today to have a guest, an author, a psychotherapist for over 40 years, a man who's led an amazingly interesting life, and somebody who I am looking forward to speaking to, because he's someone who can speak about spirituality, not just in the abstract, but how it comes into play when you really have to deal with the bumps and bruises of life. His book, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. I'll repeat that, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. Thank you so very much, Michael, for taking the time. He's in Israel, by the way. I'm in Iowa and Phil's in Los Angeles. So through the miracle of Zoom, we're here. Thank you so very much for taking the time to come on.
A pleasure, absolutely a pleasure. Especially like international feeling.
Here we go, another international conversation. Michael, we always like to begin by having our guests tell our listeners and viewers something about their own spiritual history. If you could give us a brief overview of your spiritual background and what brought you to write this memoir we're talking about today.
You know, it's interesting. It's a good question. It's not one I had actually prepared for, so it's a good one. I would say this, that my spiritual history began when I was a kid by having heroes. And my heroes as a child were Willie Mays.
You were on the wrong team, Michael.
No, I was on the right team. And then they deserted me in 1957 to go to San Francisco.
I grew up in Brooklyn, and I too.
I
was a Yankee fan from New Jersey, yeah. Okay. But I loved Willie Mays, so go ahead.
Okay. And then I also had another hero, Clarence Darrow, who was the lawyer who took on the Scopes trial and stuff like that. I read these, as a child, I was reading books about Clarence Darrow. I had a fascination for him. So I think that there was something about the hero myth that was perhaps the initial spark. It wasn't anything to do with God, supernatural, anything above and beyond the human, but there was something about extraordinary humans that gave me a lot of, I would say, had a tremendous influence on my development as a kid. I didn't come from the easiest circumstances. And I think I kind of sort of projected myself onto these sort of heroic types. And there was always a sense within myself from a young age that all of us are beyond just the limited circumstances of who we are. And it wasn't anything formulated by any kind of a philosophy. It was played out more psychologically, experientially. I was a pretty crazy and wild kid, and I would do a lot of stuff to break the rules, but it was always trying to explore boundaries. Not in a very formalized way, but there was I think I had a sense about myself, and certainly other people may have as well, that I had this tremendous amount of energy and I needed to express it and go beyond the limitations of my community or whatever was expected of me growing up on Long Island. And I think that was the beginning of a kind of a spiritual path. Then I in my 20s, I was gotten into, probably like many of us, Carlos Castaneda, and was fascinated by that. And of course, did a lot of exploration in drugs and hallucinogenics, and which to me were a tremendous awakening, really tremendous awakening. Fortunately, I had actually excellent experiences and I learned a great deal. And I think that sort of led to meditation, and also running became a tremendous passion of mine as well. Again, I think there was, I was thinking about that recently in writing the book. I think I had a sense of, without even putting a word to it, a sense of spirit inside of me that needed to expand. And I felt that in almost like, to expand the limitations of the body by running long distances or riding bicycle at crazy speeds and feeling this tremendous, extraordinary experience of oneness. So that and the book, I'll get more now into the book. The book also was our decision to go on this journey, on this bicycle. We're going around the world on a bicycle, around the world on bicycles. We chose to do that after we'd both gotten our doctorates and decided, okay, we needed a break. We needed a break from the expected routine of being a psychotherapist, where your role is, I wouldn't say is severely limited, but is limited, where there's a certain expectation of how you're supposed to be and what your interactions are designed to accomplish. I think both of us wanted to kind of throw it all away and just go to have an experience of the unknown, of uncertainty. There was some desire. I mean, first of all, I was a big fan of Thomas Paine, and that's every 7 years you need a revolution. I feel like internally also, we get into our comfort zones, and we were in our comfort zones in America. We were, as young psychologists, we were doing quite well. We had a good life. And it's interesting, I think I have this restless spirit that doesn't feel comfortable when things are going too well. There's some kind of inner drive. If it's too well, it can't be the truth. The truth is too disruptive. It's too uncomfortable. When you're feeling so good, I know it's perhaps counterintuitive, but when you're feeling too good, you really need to question. This is my philosophy. I'm saying I need to question whether, am I actually living the truth, or am I just experiencing a lot of comfort, and am I able to live within certain expectations? Anyway, this journey was designed to throw all of that aside.
Let me interject there, because I have a question for you related to this, then continue. But you wrote, I forget where if it was in the book or elsewhere I was reading about you, that before a period of growth, before any movement forward in one's life, there's usually chaos, disruption. And that's sort of what you're describing now. Now, in your life, did you wait for that disruption, for that chaos to come naturally? Or when there are times when you thought, you know what, things are too smooth now, let me create some chaos so I can have some further growth? And if that were the case, that happened consciously or unconsciously?
I think, first of all, it's a great question you're asking. I think that, it probably has a lot to do with it, that, I do believe, it's the story of creation, that chaos, precedes creation. Between, first there's void and then there's form. So I think sort of psychologically, I felt that need to create a certain amount of chaos, of unknown, of uncertainty and formlessness. And again, it was not something that I would have articulated precisely in that way. Now, in looking back, I could say, yes, that was the case. Later on, there's the famous quote, "Be careful what you ask for, you just might get it." Mm-hmm. So we got it. We got the chaos. We got the uncertainty. We got the transformation that we were hoping to have, but not in any way in the direction we would have expected. So we wanted the unexpected. We got the unexpected. And so I guess in that respect, the trip was extremely successful. Later in life, I got a certain amount of unexpected chaos that I didn't ask for, but it just happened. So it's a different kind of chaos. Let's just say it's the chaos. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, please.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you were done, but did you want to finish your thought?
No, that's okay.
Okay. So I can't resist going back to Willie Mays. And I'll tell you why. I've been a sports fan my whole life, and and when I was young, I played a lot. And I grew up in New York, and rooting against Willie Mays' team, but admiring.
You can't even say the name, can you?
You can't.
You can't even say the name.
Where did your team wind up, Phil?
But I knew he was the best, despite rooting against him. And in those days, he embodied something, he and Jackie Robinson, he embodied something that later we would attribute to people like Michael Jordan and LeBron James. And one of those things was disruption. He was not only great and did things no one else did, which is, I'm sure, one of the things that made him a hero to you, but he also created the kind of chaos that the opposition couldn't handle. Is that part of what attracted you to why you said the first hero you mentioned was Willie Mays?
Wow. Now, first of all, that's very interesting what you're saying. I hadn't thought of it like that. You know, you're talking, I have to go back to my, 8, 10, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, brain. The first thing when you started to say, the first word that came to my mind was joy, in a way that I had never seen in any person or anyone I knew. None of my parents' friends, everything was done with force and effort. And I saw that with my father. My father did everything with force. There was no flow. Willie Mays embodied to me something transcendental, and you're right. And flow and just the pure infectious joy of doing something brilliantly and something he loved doing. And it's very interesting, Phil, you should say that, because I think that to some degree I've tried to embody that in the things that I do, and to try to feel that sense of oneness and joy. And so great. Wow. That's, it's very interesting. I changed all my passwords, so I'm not giving anything away, but all my passwords for years were Willie, or 24, or it's crazy.
I'm not going to give any.
What?
Mine are uniform numbers of Brooklyn Dodgers.
Mine are much less interesting.
And here I thought I was being unique.
Right. I want to go in another direction in regard to something you wrote that was actually, it's a brilliant analogy. And you were talking about people being atheists, agnostic, believers, and your own journey in life with your wife and Alzheimer's. And the analogy used was there's no agnostics or atheists in a foxhole. So in other words, when your life is this far, when it's you're facing the abyss, what choice do you have? And is that something that occurred to you after your wife's illness or before, or did it happen more than one time in your life? Tell us about that. Yeah.
I would say that I would put it somewhat differently. I think I'm quoting myself. I don't know if anyone else said it, but I've said for a long time, God doesn't run a candy store. Right. And another great truth that I'll quote to you was, which goes to the heart of what you're asking here, which is when a month before Leonard Cohen died, he was interviewed on NPR radio, and they asked him, what's the culmination of all of your spiritual searchings, your drug use, etc.? And his answer was 2 words: don't whine. And there's something really profound about that, because just to keep your mouth shut and not complain, that's one thing. But when you don't whine, it's an acceptance on a much more profound level. It's not a passive acceptance, an acceptance of my wife's Alzheimer's. I don't whine about it, I cry about it. I've lost the love of my life. I really have. I mean, I've been blessed to have been with the most extraordinary woman, but she's gone. She's fading. There's 2% of what she used to be. But it's not a question of why. I accept that this is God, fate, the universe, whatever you wish to call it. This is the path that has occurred. There's nothing we can do about it. There was nothing we could have done to prevent it. It absolutely just happened. Okay, so. But I don't whine about it. But I accept the pain in all of the responsibility and learning how to love someone who is basically not there in any way, shape, or form as I knew her. So I do have a very profound sense that I don't fight the universe. And I don't think I have for a long time. It does, but I'm not a passive individual either. And I think part of it is faith. I have a deep faith. And I think after my wife, actually about a year or so after my wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I was trying to really understand my emotions and I was blocked, I found a psychologist after 35 years. He's 90 years old. And I said, I would never go to someone younger than me. And there's not that many people around who are older than me who are not retired. But luckily I found this fellow, and he said something to me the other day. He said, listen, you have to reach 90 to really know that you know nothing. I said, I'm 75. And that means I have about 80% realize I don't know anything, that this is a strange universe we live in. So a strange and beautiful universe, I should say, and painful.
Now, Michael, we've already leaped into sort of the end of your book, because you don't mention your wife's Alzheimer's until the epilogue.
Right.
The memoir itself is a love story about your early years together. And I want to come back to the Alzheimer's, but the memoir itself, when we were approached to have you on the show, your publicist, told us that you had a lot to say about the relationship of spirituality and psychology to being a resilient person and dealing with the ups and downs of life. You had a very romantic story to tell, but you also had difficulties. Your wife, you had a strong Jewish connection. Your wife was not until she converted. She was disowned. So there were family conflicts. Can you tell us about that interreligious tension and what it was like to deal with?
Well, first of all, I have to correct you. I didn't have a strong Jewish identity at all when I started. I was like many American Jews, somewhat affiliated to a synagogue, hated it, abandoned it totally and absolutely. Didn't step into a synagogue until we weren't married then. Deborah and I were living together, living in Vermont, until she forced me to go to the conservative synagogue in Rutland, Vermont on Yom Kippur. I lasted about 30 minutes and fled.
That's 30 minutes more than I could do.
Okay, it was torture. For the first, my experience today is quite different. But at any rate, that was 30 minutes of torture in hell. She stayed for 5 hours, didn't understand a word, had no idea what was going on, but she said it was extraordinary. Go figure. At any rate, as I said, the journey itself, we opened up ourselves to all possibilities. The last possibility in the world that I would have ever considered was reconnecting with a Jew or discovering my Jewish identity. It's not what I asked for. It's not what I thought we were going to find. I was sure we're going to end up in the ashram in Rishikesh with, Maharishi and the Beatles or something, not this. So, but this is how the universe works, or God, whatever you wish to call it. We just kept on encountering the Holocaust in the most serendipitous ways, and it kept on reawakening something within me that was obviously very buried, and it kept happening at time after time after time. Now, it never occurred to me that it would possibly be a wedge between Deborah and myself. And I wouldn't say it became a wedge. It's not exactly right, but we were faced with some difficult choices as it became more and more obvious that my Jewish roots were being exposed to me and that I couldn't run away from it. I mean, I also see that as psychologically and spiritually, not just spiritually. It's not just a spiritual search. I see it as a psychological search, because I think for me, being Jewish was as much as anything an identity, as much as a spiritual path. And I think that I had awakened in me on this trip a lot of symbols from childhood that were very Jewish of nature, even though I myself had rejected it all. But they were still there, whether it was the Holocaust or Israel or, you know, the 6-Day War and various things that I could remember from childhood that had actually a much more profound effect on me than I could have possibly imagined.
Well, let me say, when you were 12, you wrote a play about the Warsaw Uprising, and it was hard to stage because I think you wanted 20,000 people on stage. But we're the same generation, and during that period of time, you had the Eichmann trial, and you know and so all of this imagery was coming at us all the time.
Right.
How did that affect your Jewish identity and your spirituality at the time and moving forward?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, as a kid, and as I got into more spiritual pursuits, you know, whether it was, you know, getting into all the Castaneda books or using a lot of substances to get reach altered states, Jewish part was never ever an issue or a question. I had no interest, didn't speak to me in the slightest. On the other hand, the things that you mentioned historically, the kinds of incidents that we went through, whether, as I said, as I write in my book, most Jews of my generation know where they were when Israel won the 6-Day War. It's like, you know where you were when 9/11 happened or when Kennedy was assassinated. There's certain kinds of markers psychologically that go very deeply in our psyches.
Right.
And I think that I remember my father reading Exodus by Leon Uris. You probably remember that book, okay? Crying. I just have that image so strongly in my mind of that. My mother, who was as unreligious as you could find, but was a Hadassah lady. She was the president of Long Island Hadassah, fighting with a congressman to get them to support Israel in various ways. I have these were memories that I basically erased, or sort of erased, and acted as if they were no longer part of me. Yet those psychological markers don't disappear.
Right.
You can ignore them and you can repress them. But what happened on this trip, by opening ourselves up to new experiences, a lot of those repressed memories came to the surface, and I couldn't run away from them. So I would say that so much of this journey was as much as a journey towards identity. And to me, I don't make a distinction between identity and spirituality. The more grounded that we are in ourselves, the more we know who we are and where we come from and what makes us tick, the more we can express ourselves spiritually as well. My sense of spirituality is a very grounded spirituality. I always remember the poem by Gary Snyder when he talked about the disembodied teeny boppers, and he was making a very strong statement, who were disconnected from the earth. So I don't see spirituality as an escape. I see a spirituality as an entry into oneself. And I don't make distinctions between psychology and spirituality. To me, they're just a continuum. They really are. Okay? So that's why I don't like certain kinds of psychology. I don't like cognitive behavioral therapy, even though I know it well, because it's too mechanistic for me. And that's for a whole nother discussion.
Okay, speaking of such, you've lived a long life. You've seen patients or clients your whole life. You've dealt with turmoil in your own life and now great grief and sadness. What have you learned, and what can you relate to our audience, all of whom are people who take their spiritual lives seriously and also are living in the world? What can you tell us about dealing with the unexpected, the catastrophes, the difficulties, the loss, the challenges, and so forth? What have you learned?
How do you navigate those waters? Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. We just came off of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, and one of the books that we read during the holiday of Sukkot is Ecclesiastes, Kohelet in Hebrew. And Ecclesiastes I consider to be the first and best self-help book ever written. And what it really talks about, it translates the word in Hebrew called hevel, but they translated futility in English. It doesn't mean futility. It means hevel is mist, vapor. It's something that's here and then it's gone. And King Solomon, who wrote Ecclesiastes, keeps on repeating that phrase, that nothing in this world is permanent. Everything moves on and changes. And I think that there's something that can be both terrifying, on the other hand, very liberating. And for me, it's, I think, more liberating, knowing that everything changes, everything moves on. I mean, I always loved, like, with the whole concept of, like, with the mandala in the Buddhist religion, where they will make a gorgeous mandala and then they erase it, not to get attached to things to the extent that your whole identity is caught up in whatever it is that you're attached to. So I think that first of all, there are beautiful times and there are difficult times, and it's all part of life, and it's all part of the story of our individual stories. We hold on to the beautiful times and as if that is the way it always has to be, then we'll suffer terribly. Okay? And if we think that the painful times are the end of everything, that too is a form of terrible suffering. I think that we have to just have a certain kind of equanimity in life to accept and be, first of all, to be fully present and enjoy the moments. And I think that's another of the examples in Ecclesiastes, is really to enjoy the moments we have. Whether it's eating, I mean, I can wax on and on about a pizza with vodka sauce that I had in Chamonix, France, that was an out of this world experience. To me, it was a spiritual experience of the highest level. It was transformative. It really was. I can talk about flying down the mountain, soaring, and at the same token, I've had moments with my wife with Alzheimer's that were just deeply touching and beautiful and painful, but also very spiritual. So I don't think we can define and put in a box something that's moving all the time. We're in movement, we're in flux. Eventually we're going to leave this world, and whatever is beyond this, we'll get there as well. But I think that for me, spirituality is living fully, absolutely, choosing to live in the present. And whether it's sad or it's joyous or sometimes both, that's the way I want to live till I die.
Beautifully put. Again, and to our listeners, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. Get the book; it's available, and it's. I would categorize it as self-help, self-exploratory, experiencing life fully, all those things. And I think your message to me more than anything is, look, we all aspire to good times. That's what our culture, that's what pop culture teaches us. But it's not always going to be like that. And you have to deal with it and accept it and flow with it. And you might start developing some depth to yourself, some spiritual basis, because that's more than anything else we've learned historically that's going to allow people to navigate those waters, in my humble opinion. And I think you articulate that as well as anybody I've heard. So great.
I want to add something also, to go back to Phil in baseball and Willie Mays. Talking about transitory moments. Going back now, thinking about your question about spirituality and what you learned from one of the things I learned is I told my mother when the Giants left New York, I said, I'm never eating again. I'm going on a hunger strike for life.
Right.
I couldn't, this was the first experience as a child that things don't last forever.
Right.
And it was
the same for me. When the Yankees started losing, I couldn't believe it.
I don't want to hear from you, Dennis, as Yankee fans. We were abandoned.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Michael and I were abandoned as children.
Yeah.
And by the way, young fan, I never hated the Dodgers, but I hated the Yankees.
Me too. We had that in common.
Hey, look, that hasn't changed.
They were the evil empire even then.
I was in Copenhagen, Denmark 3 years ago. I had a Yankee hat on, and I was walking down the street, and some guy looks at me and goes, "The Yankees suck." And I said, wait a second. He was from Boston, by the way. Like that. We had a good laugh after that, but
That's
it
great.
goes deep.
I live in LA and I have a B Brooklyn cap and a B Boston Red Sox caps, and I alternate them, and it makes me very popular here.
Yeah, I'm
But
sure.
back to your book, Michael, we only have a few minutes. I was very moved at the end in reading, the very end of the epilogue. I want to read a couple of sentences and have you briefly comment, if you would. It makes a good ending for us.
Okay.
You wrote, "Sometimes angels wait around the bend to guide you home, and sometimes terrifying challenges demand you dig into yourself and find your truth. And sometimes there are questions for which there are no good answers." That comes in your epilogue after you reveal that that Deborah has Alzheimer's. Tell us about perhaps comment on that passage.
Well, I think that it really summarizes the journey. I don't mean just this journey that we took over a 6-7 month period, but I think the journey of life, which is that exactly that. If you're open to the world, you're open to the joy and pleasures and beauties that, whether it's interacting like with you guys just today, and it's a lovely connection, it's a special moment, or whether it's dealing with the painful realities. I mean, 2 years ago, I had started having strange symptoms while I was climbing a mountain, and turns out I have 5 fused discs in my neck, and I'm now walk with a cane 2 years later. I was a 72-year-old stud climbing mountains and doing all stuff. No longer. Things change. And it's interesting. A young man who lives next to me, he's 35 years old, hadn't seen me in a while, saw me walking with a cane. He says, "I can't accept the fact that you're that way." And I said to him, "That's your problem. Okay? You're looking at who I once was. You have to come to terms with who I am. I'm happy with who I am. I let go of that. One door closes, another door opens. Okay, it's not just a cliche, it's true." And so I would say the same thing. It's just live life. You never know what will be around the corner. You really don't know. And no matter how many times we try to control life because we're so afraid of the unexpected will still happen. If one thing COVID should have taught us all is how the unexpected can transform our lives, and as it really truly has. And there are a lot of questions. I have many more questions. My wife shouldn't have gotten Alzheimer's. She doesn't have any of the variants, the DNA, the genetic variants. She has no history in her family. She was incredibly healthy. She spoke 6 languages. She was a brilliant woman, PhD in psychology. She's not supposed to get Alzheimer's. She's not the profile, yet it happened. Okay? Do I have any answers to that? No. Does anyone have any answers? No. But that's life. We have to live with the uncertainties and the questions.
Good.
Well put. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
A pleasure. The pleasure.
Thanks for being with us, Dennis.
Writing.
Wait,
Writing
I
the
couldn't
Edge,
hear
a
you.
love
I
song.
said, I hope Willie Mays lives until he's 120.
One last thing on Willie Mays. I was a Mantle fan, but when Willie Mays caught that ball over his shoulder and threw the guy out, I just thought Mantle couldn't do that. It was like,
Big words. 1954
right.
World Series against the Cleveland Indians.
He's right.
Maybe the greatest play in baseball history. There you go.
Okay.
Smile on his face.
Yep. Thank you
All
so
right,
much,
folks. We got it. Willie
well.
Mays and Alzheimer's and everything else. Again, Dennis, do you want to say the name of Michael's book again?
Yeah, Riding the Edge, a love story to Deborah.
A love song.
Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. And I also want to mention, for those listening or watching, please subscribe. It's free, and we'd appreciate you just hit the button and do that.
Okay,
So,
Michael, thanks again for being
so
here.
Thank you so much. A pleasure. Be well.
Phil, that was Michael Tobin. Very engaging guy, certainly a very interesting life, and a wonderful relationship with his wife, and he had to really deal with it. And I think what was interesting for me was how we talk about contemporary spirituality. We'll hear somebody like all of us that needs to use that spirituality to actually deal with real life situations. I'll mention the book again, Riding the Edge, a love song to Deborah. So fascinating stuff, and something. I mean, I think everybody I know knows somebody who's dealing with someone in their family or a close friend that has Alzheimer's. So it's and I think it's because people live so long. That's part of the issue, but it's a real tough one.
Well, we should not give readers listeners the wrong impression. His book ends with his wife having Alzheimer's, and he doesn't discuss it there. He discussed it with us a bit, but the book is about the love between them and the challenges they had and the adventures they had.
Amazing life, bicycling all over the place, both PhDs in psychology, therapist.
And she comes from a Muslim family, and he comes from a Jewish family.
She converted though at one point, right?
And was disowned by her family for doing so.
Yeah, I mean, this happens. Christians and Jews and every combination, atheists and religious, and families sometimes are accepting, sometimes they're not. I thought it was interesting. He talked about the Yom Kippur service where he lasted a half hour and bolted out, and she was there for 5 hours, didn't understand what anybody said, but picked up on, I guess, aspects of it that were very inspiring to her.
It's interesting, you and I probably grew up with people falling in love with people from different religions or ethnic groups and having resistance from families.
Right.
And terrible things have happened because of it.
Right.
That happens less now because, we're multiplicity and, it's much more part of our lives, but it was not uncommon back then for people to have serious conflict because of that. The other thing that was not uncommon, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I used to notice it. Sometimes the convert is way more religious than the one born into it.
Right. Yeah, that is often the case. And that can be any religion. Somebody becomes a Christian, all of a sudden they're diehard. Their spouse isn't. Somebody becomes Jewish, and same thing. As a matter of fact, The Amazing Mrs. Maisel, which is a very popular series going on, one of the characters, and I forget who she is, she's converted to Judaism, and she's way more religious than anyone else. She goes every holiday, every day, and she's really embraced it. And I think part of that is because if you're born in a particular religion, you take it for granted. If you actually make a decision, and some people say, "All right, I'll convert just so I can get married and not be hassled by anybody's family." Other people actually make a very deep decision. I want to do this. I want to embrace this, and then they go for it, and they become a zealot. And so it's look, I grew up in a town, Jersey City, just north of Jersey City, and there were a lot of Italians who were Catholic, most of them not super religious, and there were a lot of Jewish kids, and most of them were Reformed, some conservative, but very few Orthodox, and there was a lot of intermarriage. In most cases, it wasn't a problem. Maybe it was a serious discussion, and it was this and that, but not a lot of cases where people were actually disowned, although I'm sure it happened. And like you said, it's probably less a problem
dead
now.
To me.
They're dead, finished. Well, there's stories of a lot of people have gone through that. Must be incredibly painful.
No, it's true.
For folks to go through that. And I think, and then there's a lot of people that, it would be easier if you found somebody that had a similar background to you. But if you don't, we can live with it. And so there's a lot of very sweet stories too about people embracing.
And some of the sweetest stories are the ones where the parents resist and try to convince them not to. But once the decision is made, the parents have to adapt, and then they get to know the person.
Right.
And it's the best thing that ever.
Right, right. I heard a funny story, and we'll get back to the book, where a guy was telling me that he was marrying somebody of another faith, and he went to his, but the parents knew her. And he said to his parents, I know it's going to be hard on you. We decided to get married. What do you think? He said, what do we think? Marry you tomorrow before she leaves you. Like, they feel so lucky like that. If she gets to know you any better, she's not going to be around anymore. You know, it was like one of those things. We don't care what you become. Like, just go with her, you know. So it's, so that happens. But obviously, you know, Michael's had a very profound connection with his wife. I think to be that deeply entangled, one needs a real spiritual basis, whether it's manifest in a particular religious tradition or not. I think it transcended all of that in the way he described it, and that it didn't matter who became what religion, that it was, you know, going to be something very significant.
Love has nothing to do with any of those boundaries.
Right.
You know, it you know, that expression, love conquers all, in a sense, you know, his story is like that. But, you know, he has a very grounded in the world sense of spirituality. I mean, we wouldn't have had somebody on the show who just had a good love story to tell.
Right.
There's a deep, strong spiritual overtone and undercurrent to everything he said.
Right,
And,
right.
you
And
know,
I think
and let's not, what?
No, go ahead.
And let's not overlook the fact that the first person he mentioned when we asked about spiritual inspiration was Willie Mays.
I like that.
Oh, man.
And the flow,
Yes.
and there was something very cosmic about how he played. I mean, if you were from that era, it was amazing. The other thing I thought that was very insightful is, and I don't know if it was a quote that he first came up with or he got it from somewhere else, and he said, "You don't have a lot of agnostics in a
Atheists in a foxhole."
So when you really hit the wall, you know, this is it. It could be, I could be gone any moment now. And then one suddenly becomes very spiritual, very interested, and in getting some support from a higher being. And when he went through it, and I also thought it was very helpful for anyone to hear that, look, there's going to be pain, there's going to be tough times in life. You have to embrace it and go with it, and you don't have to like it, but you know, you have to deal with it. Also, the story he told about how he was, you know, climbing mountains, and all of a sudden, you know, he's walking with a cane. He accepted that. If he had the young guy had a harder time accepting it, his friend, than he did. And if you don't accept it, you're going to be miserable. At some point, if you accept it, this is what it is.
No, I mean, to me, one of the hallmarks of spiritual progress is what the Bhagavad Gita describes as having equanimity in loss and gain, defeat and victory, pain and pleasure. That inner stability, inner peace, and the ability to accept what is and gracefully adapt and not lose your center and not lose your gratitude and your appreciation. Those are challenges on the spiritual path.
Right.
You know, some people don't do it very well, and some people do.
Right. And life throws a lot of curveballs at you. Funny story like that. I remember going on one of my first residence courses where I was doing many hours of meditation, and for about a week, and it was right before Thanksgiving, and I came back and I felt this great equanimity. I thought, this is it. And then I went to my family's Thanksgiving dinner, and it was everybody's Italian, yelling and throwing, and it was like the equanimity went right out the window. And I realized that, you know, it's there's a line in Somerset Maugham's book, The Razor's Edge. The main character, when he reflects on, he goes off, and this is like in the 1930s, goes off into the Himalayas and all, and he said, you know, it's easy to be enlightened, to be a monk on a mountaintop. It's when you come back into the world and you're really dealing with the day-to-day, the monotony, every aspect of it. That's when you're really tested. So I think we all have those challenges. And I think Michael very beautifully in his book and in the interview articulated much of what his perspective is on it.
I was at a party once, and people were, chatting, and one guy came over, and he had just been on a 1-month silent Vipassana retreat, and he was saying, he's so expanded, he's never felt this way. He's been totally transformed. All the stuff
Right.
that we aspire to on the spiritual life, the great awareness, the inner stability. And as soon as he walked away, somebody who knows him says, "Let's see if he passes the spouse test." He hadn't even been home yet.
Good luck. That's when it hits the fan. But anyway, well, excellent
Okay.
test. The name of the book, "Riding the Edge: A Love Song to Deborah." For those listening or watching, please help us stay on the air. We're not a nonprofit, but you can contribute. Thank those people. I want to thank those people that have contributed. Go to spiritmatterstalk.com. It'll tell you what to do. And also, whether you're listening or watching, hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything, and it really would help us if you did that. Our subscription numbers are going up, and we want to continue that. And again, our archives, 300 or so interviews, some really wonderful people, and we have some great ones coming up. So stay tuned. Phil,
Stay tuned.
Time.
Take care.
Billy
Next time,
Mays,
Dennis.
remember that. Yep. All right.